Hello, welcome back to another episode of the JME Files podcast. I'm going to be releasing each new episode every Wednesday from now on. I've had a schedule change, so now it's Wednesday. Every new episode every Wednesday. Before it was every Monday, so now it's every Wednesday, just so you guys know. Alright, so there's been a lot that's happened this week. There has been the Gabby Petito missing person investigation. I guess they just recently found out that it was a homicide, and they're looking for the boyfriend. And as far as right now, they still haven't found him. But another thing that came onto my radar over this past weekend, and the past few days, has been art. And it all started because I haven't been to the movies in the longest time. And I actually went to the movies over the weekend. I had a great time. I loved it. And it was a lot of fun. And it brought back a lot of nostalgia, actually. Because I used to be a movie-holic. I used to go to the movies all the time. I'd watch a bunch of them. I was a movie-holic. And it's been about a year and a half since over the last year and a half, I've seen one movie in the theater. Besides, I guess this makes two. But it's been a long time. So it brought back a lot of nostalgia. So As I'm having this nostalgia of remembering the movie experience, remembering how I felt going to the movies and then coming out of the theater, and just certain characters that I used to really like, and different movies and the stories, and I just used to really love them. And I still do, but in the last several years, starting in 2003, I actually remember the year where I stopped kind of being super into movies. Was 2003. And of course, just like anyone else, there's still Netflix, and movies are still a part of entertainment and leisure, so I would still see them and watch them, but it wasn't the same. The last prolific movie, or the last movie that I thought was original, I don't want to say that to insult. There's definitely been many original works that have had to have come out since 2003, but I'm just saying I can't remember having a movie that felt as original as movies like Fight Club or The Matrix, or even like American Beauty. Yeah, I don't know why those were the last three movies that kind of made a big impact on me. And I've enjoyed movies since then. They just haven't made that much of an impact on me. Like, I'll watch them, that was a cool movie, and then I forget about them. But yeah, Fight Club, American Beauty, Matrix, those are just The Matrix, the first one. Those like just stand out in my memory as the last like really original things that I've seen. And I don't know if those are original. Like, Fight Club was taken from a book, and The Matrix, it's chock full of other motifs from anime, philosophy. But I mean, isn't that all works of art is always inspired by something else? But anyway, so I came across this writer named Mark Fisher, and Mark Fisher has a very interesting quote. And his quote was, he actually he committed suicide in 2017 at the age of 48. But he was a philosopher / social commenter / like social critic. So he writes a lot about the state of society. And he has a quote which is that the future of the 21st century is the 20th century on an HD screen. And if you look around at your HD screen, that's mostly what you see. If you look at television shows, if you look at them, a lot of them are from older periods, like from the 70s or from the 80s and the 90s. And I know this because I also do a little bit of background work for films, and I'm telling you that at least, I'd say more than half of the things that are being shot, film and TV, require you to be able to change your look to that of the 70s or the 80s or the 90s. So they want like medium long. So I had medium or longer hair, and I ended up cutting it. So now it's kind of like there's not a lot of work for this haircut. There still is, but just not as much. And so the point of Mark Fisher's quote that the future of the 21st century is the 20th century on an HD screen is that in this book that he wrote a few of them, but in the book that he wrote, it's skipping my memory right now, but anyway, he points out that art at different times in history, it has always been a reflection of the times. Art has always been a reflection of the times. So if there's a lot of prosperity and there's an enlightenment happening, you'll see the art will reflect that. And you'll have beautiful creative works, masterpieces emerge. And so you saw this like in the Enlightenment era, the Renaissance era in Europe and things like that. But what he sees going on now is what he calls a lost future. He thinks that the future, we're actually destroying it. We're losing the future because art and imagination is usually what creates the future. And nowadays, the problem with art is capitalism. This is in Mark Fisher's view of the world, because this relentless capitalism that we have is all about profit. And so being original, taking the time to really create an original piece of work is totally inefficient in this uber capitalistic world that we're living in. It's too slow, and it doesn't have mass appeal a lot of times. Only a select few will be able to grasp the magnitude of certain really, if you look at like Andy Warhol and his things with the tomato soup cans and stuff like that, to the untrained eye, it's not as good as someone else who can draw a city and really detailed anatomy and knows how to blend colors and shadows perfectly so that it looks almost like a photograph. But people would look at Andy Warhol's soup cans compared to that high technical skilled art and say, like, why is the Andy Warhol stuff so expensive, or why is it so famous and the kid in my class isn't famous? And the reason why is because of the meaning that the art is embodying within that craft. And what Andy Warhol was showing was basically that capitalism had taken over the meaning of art and the creativity and the originality within creating art. So he just said, okay, let's mass produce it then. I'm just going to mass produce all these already pop culture icons, and let's see how this does. And it ended up making him famous. And so, like, if you look at, that's why today's movies and works of art, it's hard to find, and I'm not saying there's no one trying, and if there's movies out there that really are original and awesome that I haven't seen, then I haven't seen them. But the point I'm trying to make is that in this day and age, it's all about profit and it's all about pleasure. So that's why if you look at the job situation with work, if you just look at work, it's really unstable right now. And a lot of people are having to look for other ways of making extra income. A lot of people have to go freelance. People that never even thought of doing freelance stuff before are doing freelance now. And even if you have a job, like you're an employee somewhere, how stable do you feel your job actually is? There's like a lot of uncertainty. And it's not just because of the pandemic. It's a lot to do. The pandemic fast forwarded a lot of this, but a lot of this has to do with is capitalism and pleasure, the pursuit of pleasure. It's this lethal combination of things. So that's why if you look at the genre of cyberpunk or science fiction, but specifically cyberpunk themes in anime or in video games or in movies will always usually depict a future that has been taken over by corporations. So what are corporations? What is the function and purpose of corporations? It's profit. So corporations have taken over the world, over the governments, and they run everything. And the pursuit of pleasure often comes with the pursuit of profit. So in a lot of cyberpunk worlds, you'll see drug use is rampant. There's always these new synthetic drugs, electronic drugs, in many cases, that people are hooked on. And there's a lot of depression, and there's a lot of dismal themes going on in the world because it's all driven by profit. So if you even look at buildings, as I think in the 70s, this is when it happened. As things became more profit driven, it's all about the bottom line. It's all about faster, better, more. Malls and architecture also started changing into more bleak, more efficient type units that can house more businesses and malls in a more efficient way, and which is good for profit, but then it takes away a lot of the soul or a lot of the beauty, you could say, of a city. And so if you look at Southern California, if you look at most of America, it's strip malls, mini malls all throughout, and all the buildings kind of look the same. And this is because of a profit-driven society. By the way, this is all Mark Fisher's thoughts, so I'm not saying this is bad or good. I'm just an observer. I see myself as like a specter. A specter is like an ethereal being that travels through, that can reappear and appear at different points in time. So I see myself as sort of a specter from the present day. So, are we moving into a future of no futures? Of where it's all just going to be a pursuit of hedonic pleasure, of the senses, of no meaning, of just rinse and repeat, this whole cycle of making more money and then spending that money on more pleasure, then making more money and then spending more money on that pleasure? Is there nothing else? There's always something else, but this is the type of society that we're living in. So another thing in Mark Fisher's work is he talks about raves. So I used to go to raves in the 90s, not what you have nowadays. Nowadays you have like EDM or like EDC festivals. Nowadays it's not raves, it's festivals. And I've actually gone to a couple of them recently as a 40-year-old. But it was just kind of this spur of the moment kind of things, like in 2019 before pandemic. But I used to go to the real raves of the 90s. So in the raves of the 90s, this is how it worked. At least in California, you need to get a flyer. Then you need to find a checkpoint. So you kind of know, you have the insider information, you know where the checkpoint is. Then you need to go to so that the evening of the rave, you go to the checkpoint, you get the directions, because the location can move. You get the directions to the warehouse, or sometimes it's just out in the middle of nowhere, and then you go there. And it was super unorganized, but it worked. It always seemed to work most of the time. You get there, sometimes people will still be setting up. Finally, once they finish setting up and the DJ gets on, it's like an explosion, like an eruption of excitement, and people are just super into it. But he, in Mark Fisher's work, he talks about where rave music and raves evolved out of. Not really the process of how they evolved, but the overarching womb that would give birth to rave music is actually the lost future concept, because if you think about like jungle music, drum and bass, that kind of music, it's like this dark, dismal, scary sounding, like really rapid beats, pronounced beats, and you're inside of a dark warehouse. So he actually said what is happening at raves is people are subconsciously or unconsciously fearful about the future because they don't see one. So being in this warehouse, this dark warehouse with all these other people on drugs and dancing the whole night away to this electronic music, this dark electronic music, it's in a way purging their fears about this no future. So then you have like Sid Vicious too, and he had the famous slogan, the no future. And the 90s, they call the 90s generation the Generation X. And then you get the Gen Zs, the millennials, or the millennials and the Gen Zs. But it's this whole concept that Mark Fisher is pointing out, that there is no future. And if there is one, it's just a repeat of the 20th century. So the 21st century is just images and nostalgia of the last century. And I could see a lot of truth in that, because if everything is going to be profit driven, pleasure driven, which it is right now, and even with the technology, and see, this is the thing too, is that it's not just corporations and it's not just the pursuit of pleasure, but now you have technology to fast forward all this. And it's not even like an agenda. No one's saying this is an agenda or this is being manipulated by a small group of people, but whatever it is, this is what's happening. We're moving into a future that we're not so certain about. And so what does this all mean for us, for humanity? It means a couple things. The first one is it's happiness. The first one is happiness, and it's a cliche by now. You've heard of all the statistics about how people in third world countries are actually happier than people in first world countries, how anxiety is a first world symptom, and it's because of the lifestyle that we live, this profit-driven lifestyle where it's all about profit. And that doesn't necessarily equate to happiness, especially when we're using more brain power to actually pacify ourselves. So here's the other big side effect of this profit-driven world that Mark Fisher points out, is that it creates passivity. Or not passivity, yes, but it pacifies us into non-engagement with the society, with others, with the world. So even learning, like even the ways in which we learning is supposed to be best done when it's an experience, when you learn through experience, which is why with anything that you learn, you have to get your hands dirty. You have to actually do it. Doing it is the only way to actually learn how to do something. And we're losing that part of the learning process. And so learning is a lot online nowadays. And this is also because of the pandemic, fast forwarded this, but it's also because of profit, because it's more efficient. If you can cut down on costs and you can increase revenues, and you can shorten time, save time, that's all, it still all equates to the bottom line, which is profit. So it's making us more pacified as people. So when you look at a human being and what it's capable of, and it comes with this body and this mind and this spirit, and it's capable of doing amazing feats. You see athletes do this, but even psychic feats that we just don't really know too much about because it's not studied a lot, it's not even acknowledged a lot. The mental powers of the mind that are dormant, and there's a whole bunch of research on mental phenomenon that has happened, and it's hard at many times in history, but it's hard to replicate in a laboratory setting with any kind of consistency. But it doesn't mean it didn't happen. Talking now about psychic phenomenon or even telekinesis or psychokinesis. These things have been observed before, but they're just really hard to reproduce in laboratory settings. But so the whole point of this is that we're using so much energy to turn us into, I hate to use the quote from The Matrix, but into like a battery pack, just an energy source for the economy. And that's what Mark Fisher's point was about the modern, or what he called like postmodernism, the world that we're living in, this postmodern world. So yeah, it's kind of a double-edged sword where we have this compulsion to always make things easier for ourselves and to make things more efficient for ourselves and to make things more comfortable for ourselves. In a lot of ways, that's what I think is the underlying issue when it comes to thinking all about profit, is that it's more and more comforts. To quote Fight Club, now they're all coming back because, like I said, it's one of the last movies, is the things you own end up owning you. And so it's a really good time to, what's the solution? So I'll leave you with a little exercise, mental experiment that you could try, is just to reevaluate your values. What do you value most in life? Not things that, I want to make my mom proud, or I want to end world hunger, but just what are your core values, and what does happiness mean to you is really the question to ask yourself. A lot of people are ego driven when it comes to this, but if there's no one there to inflate your ego, what would the next best thing be? And it's really it's a search, and it's a long-lived pursuit of seekers out there everywhere. And perhaps this is the meaning of life, is to have the imaginal, which is, the imaginal is your ability to create and to give meaning to life that you choose, that you create. You get to create the story. You get to create the meaning that you have about this whole adventure and what it means to you, the imaginal. And so I'll leave you with that today. Mark Fisher, if you want to check out some of his books. Some of it is a little dismal, to be honest, but it's still worth checking out. And it's good to know about the context in which we exist, and because this is a reality. All right, guys, so I'll see you next week, next Wednesday. So I actually am putting this out a little bit day after, but yeah, so it's going to be every Wednesday from now on. All right, so we'll see you next time. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment.